Our next speaker is Rafe Heydel-Mankoo, Senior Fellow at the New Culture Forum, but I'm sure many of you will have seen him on your television screens on GB News and Talk TV, discussing royal and constitutional matters, both last year around the death of Queen Elizabeth II and indeed around the King's coronation earlier this year. So please put your hands together and welcome Rafe.
Thank you, Andrew. Good afternoon, everybody. This is the third time in 5 weeks I've spoken from this podium, so I'm feeling quite at home here. It's also a great pleasure for me to finally address the Freedom Association, because I've been a long admirer of it, and indeed the co-founder was an old family friend. I'm speaking about the redoubtable Viscount de Lisle, the last British Governor-General of Australia, and the last VC, the last holder of the Victoria Cross to have sat in both Houses of Parliament. I'm also pleased that you've chosen to talk about cancel culture, and this is going to be a bit more of a niche speech than the last, because I think it's actually, I was going to be quite negative actually and doom-laden, but I thought I'd be constructive in this talk. And I'm particularly pleased that we're talking about this because cancel culture really is, I think, the most powerful and most sinister weapon in the progressive arsenal, and it's being utilized to great effect now in critical areas of our life, private life, public life, and professional life, to silence dissent and to enforce coercion into believing things which we know to be patently false. And the question that this conference is posing is, how can we conquer cancel culture? And we've had some great contributions so far on this topic, but I want to humbly submit that there is no path to victory, there is no hope of conquering cancel culture if we do not first win the battle of young minds. And I say that not least because society's growing illiberalism and the growing intolerance to diversity of opinion and diversity of thought is most profound amongst the young. It's a demographic that is more left-wing than any other previous generation, and uniquely, it is not getting conservative as it gets older. We've never experienced this before. And it's also set to become a major political force in this country far earlier than I think most people realize. And that's going to have profound consequences for us, for freedom, and for free speech in the years to come. So what do I mean when I talk about young minds? Because, of course, we've heard earlier on in this conference, we had Eric Kaufman talking about university and cancel culture. And indeed, when you talk about cancel culture, many people immediately think about university campuses and blue-haired banshees shouting down professors and trying to fire university heads of departments and so forth. But when it comes to winning the battle for young minds, there's a simple rule I follow. If the hair is blue, there's nothing you can do. It's far too late. The battle for young minds has to be fought far earlier in a child's life to have real success. Just remember Aristotle's oft-quoted adage, give me a boy till the age of 7 and I will show you the man. And it's a child's formative years that have the most profound effects on their character, on their attitude, on their personality, on their social skills and development. So as important as universities are, it's the pre-university stage of development, from their early years through to secondary school, that's crucial to the moulding of minds and the inculcation of liberal values. And unfortunately, in recent times, and particularly over the course of the past 10 years in Britain and also across the Anglosphere, parents and teachers alike have been nurturing youth who are increasingly fragile and brittle. And they're emotionally, they're intellectually and socially stunted, and they're completely unprepared for the realities of life. And coincidentally, those very failings are the very things that make them ripe for infection by the woke mind virus. So how did that come to be? Well, there's a best-selling book you may have heard of from America called The Coddling of the American Mind by Professor John Haidt, a psychologist, and his co-author Greg Lukianoff, who shows how overly protective parenting and the health and safety culture so prevalent in schools has created these fragile, risk-adverse children whose lives are lived in very safe and sanitized surroundings, rarely without adult supervision. They're coddled and protected from basically from the rough and tumble life experiences that we all had growing up. And because of that, they're almost in an incubator, which is completely free from exposure to the daily life pathogens that we all got used to when we were growing up, and which equip you with the skills for dealing with life. Now, Haidt points out that by shielding children from every possible risk, parents and teachers are setting up these kids for disaster, because when they eventually do encounter minor situations in life which have no risk whatsoever, they will overreact with exaggerated fear. If a child has never had an argument with another child in their life, and suddenly they're at university and they're being challenged by a student or by a professor, they're likely to react in a very severe way, feeling safe and threatened, and to be more in favor of cancel culture. So despite their best intentions, parents and teachers are performing a massive disservice to our youth and to all of us by stunting their personal development. And there's another way to look at this, and it's quite an often used analogy, and that's with allergies. As you may know, children today have far more allergies than in the past, and of course one of the reasons for that is that they live in much more sterile environments. Everyone is bleaching and using antibacterial products, and so they're growing up as babies without being exposed to the elements we were all exposed to when we were growing up, which helped us build up our immunity. And it's in a similar way that the lack of exposure of young children today to the world around them means that they don't have their wits sharpened in the playgrounds, Lord of the Flies style, survival of the fittest. They rarely have to deal with one-on-one, face-to-face conflicts or teasing or bullying, be it a verbal argument or be it a physical fight with other children. And they're rarely in a position where they have to sort out disagreements themselves or learn how to compromise or handle being contradicted by somebody or with an opposing viewpoint. And in the risk-adverse, safety-led culture of our school system, where conkers are banned, snowball fights are banned, they rarely actually engage in proper play with other children. And they're unable to make decisions on risk like you normally would. Decisions to climb a tree, to jump off a tree, and if you get hurt, learn from the consequences of your mistake. Add to all of that the creation of trigger warnings and safe spaces, and using terms for physical harm like trauma and safety, but applying it to very loose mental terms. And parents and teachers in schools are facilitating this damaging overprotection of students, and they're actually encouraging the belief that it's words and ideas that are violent and harmful and dangerous. So what's the solution to all of that? Well, first and foremost, we really need to educate parents and teachers about the importance of the school of hard knocks for developing a child's social and emotional skills, and the damage that they're causing by not exposing their children to the realities of life. They have to become the parent who takes their child to that chickenpox party. Secondly, a point made by Heydel also is that schools have to allow children to play unsupervised. And there's a great video on the internet of a school in New Zealand which every day has 2 40-minute breaks where the children are free to do whatever they want unsupervised. There's only one rule from the headmaster, that's don't kill anyone. And apart from that, many of them are barefoot, they climb trees, they fight with bows and arrows and branches and broken planks, and it looks actually, I have to say, quite dangerous. But it works because they learn about risk and the consequences of bad decisions. They learn how to handle conflict. They learn about emotion and dealing with other people. And it's their independent actions that are building their resilience and their strength. Thirdly, when you get to secondary school, we must develop Aristotle's intellectual virtues, which are the qualities of truth, knowledge, and understanding, which make you into critical thinkers. And those virtues include primarily intellectual curiosity and humility, so being open to contrary viewpoints, understanding also that however right you're convinced you are, there's always a chance you may be wrong, and to acknowledge that. Also, schools, I think, really must abide by a series of commandments, be it an educational 10 commandments, if you will, one of which is no compelled speech, thought, or belief should be taught in schools. Children must be taught how to think, not what to think. Not to think that the British Empire is bad. Related to that, the second principle essentially is that the promotion of contested ideology must be banned. No critical race theory, no gender ideology, for example. The third one, very important, is respect for dissent, individuality, and conformity. Opposing views must be respected, and critics mustn't be silenced. You know, children don't feel they can speak up quite often in school and in class for fear of being shouted down. Fourth principle is, in the early stages of a child's primary education, classes should focus on building emotional and intellectual strength. Children must be taught resilience and how to handle conflict, and they must be comfortable being challenged and understand that words are not violence. And then in later years, classes must teach the importance of free speech and the value of diversity of thought. And I've argued for a long time that from the ages of 10 to 16, pupils should take part in mandatory classroom debates in which each pupil argues for a position he or she would normally oppose. That will enable them to learn the art of respectful argument, as well as to better appreciate the validity of opposing viewpoints. In secondary school also, pupils must be taught, this is essential, the dangers arising from the loss of freedom, the loss of fundamental freedoms like free speech, and that should be taught with clear examples from history, also from literature, passages read from Alexander Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago and so forth. And the Department of Education must maintain a list of books that are deemed problematic, that term loved of the left, by radical progressives, and which are at risk of being banned or removed from shelves. And no school will be permitted to ban or remove any book that appears on this list, which will be displayed on the Department of Education website. But as useful as all those reforms are, that's only part of the solution to cancel culture, because no meaningful change is possible when you have such an imbalance in the teaching profession of teachers who lean to the right, where fewer than 10% of teachers vote for centre-right parties. So to attract conservatives and libertarians back to the teaching profession, new routes of entry must be established from conservative-friendly fields like business and the military. Now, the government already has a Troops to Teachers program, which pays soldiers to become teachers. That needs to be developed and expanded as it brings discipline, importantly, into the classroom and also provides role models for students to look up to. And attracting talent from the corporate world is very important, because that will enable conservatives to finally get into the management structures of schools and departments, because hitherto the left have been far more successful than the right in gaining control of the institutional levels of power. But there's no attempt to break the left's stranglehold of teaching can succeed without tackling the teacher training institutions. Teacher training institutions are at the root cause of so many of the problems that we face today. Now, it wasn't always so. When they were small independent colleges, they performed pretty well, actually, but all of those colleges almost have been closed down and taken over by universities. And today, most teachers today are graduates of university education departments, or as I call them, the woke madrasas, which are indoctrinating a generation of teachers into radical left groupthink. So if we want to stop the advance of radical progressivism in our schools, it's essential to end universities' involvement in teacher training. Instead, teachers should be offered on-the-job training, whereby they are trained in special training schools, just as doctors are trained in university teaching hospitals. Now, this was proposed by the Tories in 1992, and it's a policy with huge potential, because it would see the creation of national training schools across the nation run by some of the very best and most experienced teachers and head teachers in the country. Now, if we were to embark on just one of those reforms, there would be conflict with the teaching unions. To pursue all of those would be a declaration of war. But I say bring it on. Because, it was said that David Cameron wanted to take on the NUT as Thatcher had done for the National Union of Miners. He never did, but I think it's a reckoning long overdue. Because the militant unions have been the progenitors and the enablers of much of the woke ideology that dominates our system today. The National Education Union has even called for the national curriculum to be decolonized. So if attempts to bring more conservatives into education are successful, this will also have the effect of eventually diluting the unions and making them more centrist. Finally, parents must also form part of any serious attempt to end cancel culture and the left's dominance of education. They must play a more active role in the child's school life, knowing what's going on, what they're being taught, and collectively they can exert influence. Any parent should have the right to remove their child from school if they object to the content that's being taught or deem the manner in which they're being taught to be unacceptable. And conservative parents must start running to serve as school governors. Now, they're not involved in the running of a school, but they can hold the head teacher to account. They can ask why schools are teaching contested ideologies, and they can examine policies on diversity, gender behavior, etc., that a school may wish to implement. Taken together, I think these reforms are perhaps our best hope of introducing and producing informed and engaged citizens of the future who appreciate the value of free speech and the dangers posed by cancel culture. With some equilibrium restored to the teaching profession, young people will hopefully have a balanced and rounded education that enables them to think freely and critically. And liberated from radicalism, we can only hope that many of them will once again embrace liberal principles of freedom, tolerance, and free speech, and hopefully ensure a more balanced and stable future for all of us. Thank you.